tonight drove all the way from Burnett County, Texas to be with y'all. And for those of you old enough to remember, there are a few of you out there. You remember way back when we used to do these things called missions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the last one we successfully went on was in the fall of 2019. And our last stop on the first day was at Torr, Lochs, near Marble Falls. And it is a guy that's probably been on too many wine tours in Texas, California, Canada, Mexico, Italy, France. Torr, Lochs might be one of the most beautiful vineyards I've ever been to. It's down in the hill country overlooking a beautiful lake. And want to welcome Blake and Karen DeBerry to come up and tell us what the heck Torr Lochs means, as well as a little bit about their winery, and he's also going to discuss wine closure devices. Blake DeBerry.
And I'm going to step in here just a minute. We have show and tell on each table, but would you please use your gloves that are on the table when you're trying on those, okay?
With your what?
Sorry.
All right, thanks. Okay. I'm going to pull the mask off because otherwise I won't see the darn thing fall. So thank you, John, and thank you for having us here. It wasn't that bad of a journey because my son lives in Flower Mound and he had a daughter. He had a COVID baby, so this is our third time to see our 6-month-old granddaughter. So it was worth the trip today. So I'm going to start out with talking a little bit about Torr Lochs and help you understand why we have such a weird name. But I have to make a confession first. I'm an engineer by trade. My wife's a CPA. Never in my wildest dreams would we believe that we would own a vineyard or winery. But worse, I confess, I'm a nerd. I'm a nerd because while living overseas, we took a trip to Portugal for a week. And the most exciting thing I talked about when I came back was the trip to the Cork Museum. Right? And I'm also a nerd because once we started building the winery, I read this book, To Cork or Not to Cork, that's the question, right? And that started my fascination with the whole wine closures. And so Torr Lochs is a vision of Karen and mine that started without us really knowing it started, to be honest, many years ago. If you look at our website, you'll learn that we became boyfriend and girlfriend. I was a whopping 14 and she was 13. So we were in the 8th grade, and we've been together for, it'll be 40 years this May. We've been married.
Wow.
Part of that journey was living overseas. We spent 10 years overseas. I only tell you that because it's key to how we got to where we are today. We left the U.S. in 2001, returned in 2011, spent 2 years in Singapore, then moved to Aberdeen, Scotland, spent 2 years in Aberdeen, Scotland. Then thankfully, the Lord blessed us and moved us back to Singapore, where we spent 6 years in Singapore. And when we moved into the house in Singapore, it had a wine fridge. We didn't drink wine. We thought, cool, got a wine fridge, we should fill it. And so we started buying, collecting, and drinking wine, and that started us on our journey. And in 2004, while living in Aberdeen, Scotland, one of our goals was to buy property in the hill country to retire upon. And so we found this piece of property that John described. It sits about 1,100 foot elevation, looking down on the Colorado River Valley with views of Lake Buchanan Dam, Inks Lake, the hill country behind. In fact, you can see Pack Saddle Mountain, and you can see Enchanted Rock from there on a clear day. So it's an incredibly scenic site. But we bought it to live on, not to build a winery. We were just going to retire, put some cows down, live a very peaceful, quiet life, just the two of us. And as fate would have it, first off, we named it Torr Lochs. We named the ranch Torr Lochs. It's Gaelic, so it honors our time in Scotland. And Torr Lochs, loosely translated into hill over lakes. So that's what it means. So the name of the winery reflects the property and the land itself. Fast forward, we moved back to Singapore for our 30th wedding anniversary. We took a wine trip, a wine tour down to Australia. We went to Margaret River, which Western Australia, south of Perth, and visited many wineries there. But one of the wineries we visited in particular was a winery called Cape Grace. Try and find their wine in the U.S. Never find it. Never find it. You can order it online, and for $260 a case, they'll ship it. So the shipping is more money than the case price of the wine, right? I do have a case of it, though, by the way. But we have a nostalgic, we're nostalgic about that wine because as we drove into that winery and we drive through the vineyard and up to the winery building, we drive it on like a ranch road, 2 dirt tracks with grass in the middle, and I'm looking around, I'm like, red dirt, scrubby brush, and I turned to Karen and said, hey, this looks like our property in Vernon. And she goes, yeah, it does. And we pulled up to the winery and it was a barn. So if you've seen Lochs, it's a barn. It's a big barn, but it looks like a barn. And we went in and there was one gentleman behind the counter serving wine. I was the driver, and the drinking rules are incredibly strict in Australia, so I drank nothing. So I'm walking around looking at press clippings and whatnot, and as I look at the pictures of the press clippings, and I look at the guy behind, it's the owner pouring the wine in the tasting room. And it was us and my cousin and his wife, the 4 of us, and we spent like 4 hours there. Ultimately, he took us in the back, showed us how he made the wine. Very engaging couple. And as we were leaving the winery, I said to Karen, you know what might be a fun retirement project? We could build a little vineyard and winery. We did. The only part that didn't add up was that fun part. Because like any other business, I think if you talk to any winery owner, they're going to tell you, and you say, I want to build a wine, first thing I tell you is don't do it, right? What I will say is it has been fun. If we had to do it over, we have people ask us that all the time, would you do it again? And the answer is yes. Maybe a different timeline or different timing, but yes, we meet engaging people all the time. COVID has been very difficult for us because what we do on a normal day is walk around and meet people. And I have found that I can talk with somebody within 30 minutes. We know somebody or something in common. Doesn't matter what. And that for me is one of the more engaging things. So that's the bit on Lochs. So how we got started, we moved back to the U.S. in mid-year 2011, and we immediately went to Texas wineries every weekend. And all weekend long, we would go and taste wine, taste not only the wine, but what was the tasting experience like, trying to figure out what do we want to be when we grow up. In 2012, we started clearing the land. We cleared 80 acres of cedar off of 180 acres of ranch. And we found what we believed was the first site to be our first vineyard that was 3 acres. We spent 2 years as weekend warriors, me and that lady, digging up rocks, putting in irrigation, putting in power. This site had nothing. It was raw land, barely a road you could come in on. And we planted our first vines in April of 2014. Now, I'm going to tell you that we got our first harvest in August of 2015. Everybody's going to go, no way. Secondly, fine, impossible. So I'm going to tell you how we got there. So our vineyard is 3 acres. It's about 2,000 plants. My son, who lives in Flower Mound, he moved as far away from Vernon as he physically did after this. We augered a 12-inch diameter hole 3 feet deep for every plant, and we did it in 40 hours over a span of 2.5 days.
Wow.
We never turned the machine off. Then we put 3 scoops of compost in the bottom of the hole, pulled all the rocks out of the backfill, put a scoop of compost in the backfill, and then refilled the hole up. It was very much like a military exercise, right? Dig a hole, fill up the hole. And then on planting day, we had 60 of our closest friends that I don't think we see that much anymore. They came out and they helped us plant. The plants come bare rooted. We got the vines from California. They come bare rooted, and we dip them in a beneficial fungus called mycorrhizae, which it's a parasite to the plant, but it actually stimulates root growth. growth. Each plant has 2 drip emitters that are 18 inches away from the plant, but when the plant is very new, its roots are this big around, so that's 4,000 drip emitters. So we cut 4,000 little tubes, plugged them in, and brought it right to the plant, so right at first it drips right on the plant. About 6 months down the road, we took that drip tube and we moved it 12 inches out, and then we dripped there, right? And we just did a lot of work that's not anything a commercial vineyard would do, right? And because of that, we have sufficient vigor and sufficient root structure to harvest in August of 2015.
Wow.
So this is our vineyard. It's 3 acres of vines. It's about 50% Syrah, which is what one of the wines you have in front of you. 40% Malbec, 10% Petite Syrah. The Petite Syrah we typically blend with the Syrah, so that Syrah you're drinking is actually 82% Syrah, 18% Petite Syrah. We also have what we call the high cordon. So you all know viticulture. So you have the trunk come up and split, makes a key, that's the cordon. Most cordons are 3 foot high. Ours is this high. Everybody says, why is your cordon high? And I say, because we're old and we don't want to bend over. Everything's done by hand is what I'm trying to tell you. So that's our vineyard. So we planted in April of 14. We started construction of the winery in June of 2014. It was a very difficult site, and it was an incredibly difficult construction project. This is our first custom home. First time we built anything custom. And it's extremely difficult, I'll tell you. It's challenging because you could find contractors that could build a commercial building, and you could find contractors that could build a high-end home. You can't find a contractor that could do both. And so you're looking at my contractor over there. She ended up finishing the building. We terminated our contractor's contract, and we said we'll just finish this ourselves, which we did. And we finished it actually in April of 15, and we decided, because we saw we were going to get a crop, that opening a tasting room and doing our first crush was a suicide mission, and so we delayed opening the tasting room until we got through the crush and got our wine made. And so that's really what happened. And when we made that first batch of wine, that was going to be August of 2015. It goes into barrels. We bottled that in like June of 2016. And we didn't have a bottling line, so we used a mobile bottling truck. And here becomes part of the conversation about wine closures. So we did what you think everybody would do, is we bought a natural cork. So if you have a little bag there, I'm just going to dump mine all out. One of the corks you'll find is a natural cork, and you can see it has like irregular little pock marks around it. It's a little bit wider because it's been bleached and probably hydrogen peroxide. And that's a natural cork. So a bottling truck is a great invention for wineries because you don't have to make the investment in the bottling line, which is a substantial investment. Like everything in life, there's an upside and a downside, and you need to look at both. The downside of a bottling truck is he bottles for a lot of wineries, and maybe breweries, and maybe eateries, and maybe distilleries. And you always hope that he bottled for the distillery last, because that sanitizes everything. And you're totally dependent on the mobile bottling truck to ensure that the truck is sanitary so it does not contaminate your wine. Before we bottle every wine, we send a sample of the wine to the lab to prove to ourselves there's no bacteria, no yeast, there's nothing present, it's just wine, it's clean wine. We showed it to the bottling truck, and we say, your truck should be clean, this wine is clean, no problem. So we bottled our 2015, and this is all the wine we made in 2015. 3 wines we made of 2015 Syrah, 2015 Malbec, and a 2015 High Plains Orange Muscat, which everybody's going, sweet wine. It's a dry orange muscat. We fermented it dry, and so you get that orange muscat flavor, but you don't get the sweetness of the orange muscat. So you can see in the upper right some of the medals we won. I won't go through all of them, but I'll just say the 2015 Syrah was our very first wine, the very first one in the bottle. That's Karen and I with a picture of our very first wine after, Lord knows, what, 4 or 5 years worth of working to get to that point. And it won, we sent it to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. It was Texas Reserve Class Champion and got a silver medal. Very first wine we ever made. So we subsequently sent that to Texon. And I had a lot of winery owners say, don't send it to Texon. They're tough, because it's all soft, it's tasty. We knew better. It tastes pretty good to me. Send it in. Both the Malbec and the Syrah won a silver medal at Texon.
Woohoo!
And when that happened, I had 3 winery owners call me and say, "Do you have any idea what you just done?" Because winning a silver medal at Texon was like winning a double gold anyplace else. One of those being Kim McPherson, if you happen to know Kim. And so we said, let's keep sending it out. So we sent it to the Lone Star, double gold at Lone Star, and probably the one that I'm personally most proud of, I think Karen Price too, we sent it to San Francisco Chronicle International, won a gold medal at San Francisco.
Nice.
And as I looked at the list of Syrahs that won medals at San Francisco Chronicle, there was only one wine from Texas on that list, and that was us. So, pretty significant.
Oh.
There was a problem. There was a problem. That wine was closed with a cork. And every now and then, you'd open up a bottle, and it smelled like wet cardboard, or wet newspaper, or musty. And it tastes like absolutely nothing. No flavor. No, at that point, COVID wasn't around. And so, here comes the journey of what on earth? We did everything right, and what we started finding out is about 3% of the bottles that we opened had this problem. This is 380 cases, 4 years worth of work, 3% of the bottles had this problem. And so, we knew what it was. Cork taint. You heard of cork taint before?
Yeah.
Cork taint comes from this little critter. It can come from your winery, your barrel room one. Very, very rare. This natural cork is enemy number 1 in the cork taint battle, right? And so it naturally occurs in the cork. And by the records, 3 to 5%, which matches what we saw of wines with the natural cork, are tainted with that. And you can't fix it. There's no fixing it. Once it's in, right? And so the challenge for us, and for me, because I had read this book, To Cork or Not to Cork, was why are we doing this? Well, in what industry, if 3% of the cars didn't work, what would you do as a consumer? You'd say, I gotta find a different car, right? And you have to remember that in our wine journey, much of it was spent in Singapore drinking what? Not California wine, not French wine, Australian, reds, whites, and a lot of New Zealand white, Sauvignon Blanc.
Sauvignon Blanc.
Right? And those wines started showing up with screw caps. In the 6 years we were in Singapore, we saw and lived the transition. And so, because this can't be fixed, and I told you the symptoms, and I encourage people, when you go to a restaurant, be bold. Because I guarantee the person pouring your wine knows less about it than you do, and if it's tainted, stand up and say, this is cork taint, I'm not taking this bottle. I was actually on a business trip, and I was in Oslo, Norway. Anybody ever heard of Penfolds Grange? You ever heard of that? I was with a business partner. I said, I've always wanted to try this wine. I says, no way we can expense this, but I'll split it with you. And it was a bottle of Penfolds Grange from Oslo, Norway, 1996. This was 2018. They open it up, cork taint, $795 bottle of wine.
Oh.
Sent it back. The manager came over, he goes, "You're right." And he went and got me another. And it was fine, because it's only 3%. But imagine if you had bought that $800 bottle of wine and been saving it for a special occasion only to have it tainted, right? So, it's a problem to me. So where does cork come from? It's a tree. It's the bark of a particular oak tree, right? And you can see in this picture on the left-hand side, that's the bark that's been harvested, and they come in and they just make these cores that are the cork. They cut it to the strip width, and then they punch a core through there. And that's where the cork comes from. And there's very strict rules for what's the frequency of harvest, how close to the bottom, how close to the top, how much do you remove, how close can you core next to the true outer bark. You know, and it was really like old wives' tales. And oddly enough, if you happen to get this book, when you read in there, as often happens, the whole cork taint issue, the TCA issue, started with a political coup in Portugal. And they moved to a more, and I'm not getting on political battle, this is just the way it was, they moved to a more socialistic form of government, and they socialized the production of cork. They seized cork orchards, and they ignored the old wives' tales, because the demand for wine and the demand for cork was going up. You had not only the old world regions, but you had the new world regions. You now had California, you got Australia, you got New Zealand, you got Chile, you got Argentina, you got South Africa, right? Not to mention Little Texas, New York, Oregon. You know, there's just a huge demand, and they're trying to make as much money as they can possibly make. And so this whole cork taint issue rose to an ugly head, and that drove the investigation into wine closures by wine makers. In fact, Australia, because they're the furthest away from Portugal, so just in case there's a trivia question, which is where most of the cork comes from, they got the lowest quality cork. So they got the highest percentage of cork taint. So the Australian winemakers, together with the Australian government, each put $5 million together. They spent $10 million working with a little company called Stelvin to come up with a different wine closure. And here's where the screw cap technology really starts to flourish. So first off, there was, how do we make a cork not have TCA? So you have the natural cork, which is the one on the left in this drawing. And then you have what's called, which there's another cork on your table, this is called a technical cork or an amalgamated cork, right? And so you saw that picture with all the little punched holes. So if you're making biscuits and you punch them out, that dough will go to waste, right? Same thing. What does that cork do? So what they did is said, hey, we can grind that up, and then we can clean it to make sure there's no TCA. And then we take all those little bits and we glue it back together. And this cork is a Dion 5, which was the next cork we used. We 100% guarantee no TCA. Problem solved, right? Let me ask you a question. Is that a cork? It's a cork by appearance, but it's a manufactured product. This cork has oxygen transmission. This is cork glued together. Nobody knows does this transmit oxygen or not. We just know it doesn't give us TCA. There's no data on, because it takes years and years to get the data. You have to wait 10 years to find out did it work or not, right? And then some of the other ones you'll see that are technical corks. The third one from the left, it's a plastic cork. See a lot of white wines. It's just made of a polymer and a plastic. And you may have had this one or not, glass closure, a glass cork. That's a real rare. I've had one in all the bottles, not even one counting bottles I've had. I've had one, and it just has a little silicone O-ring in there, sits on top, and then the foil goes on, and you're cutting the foil, thinking you're gonna open a cork, and boom, next thing you know, you got this glass stopper in your hand, and the wine's open. So the industry went through, during that time period, is fairly tumultuous, and the national cork were like, we're gonna lose market share. And so there's a big argument about what is the right closure for wine. So that's what we chose, the DM cork. So we chose the technical cork. And then we went through our next year in 2016, same bottling truck. Oops, another problem. Although the wine was absolutely clean, the truck was not.
Oh, no.
2/3 of our wine, which has a small amount of residual sugar, got contaminated with yeast and started re-fermenting in the bottle. So it didn't matter that we had this fancy cork.
Kept it in.
Oh, we had calls from wine club members saying, your bottle of wine just blew up in my kitchen because of the pressure. It blew. Yeah, we're like, okay, we'll repaint your walls for you. I mean, what can we do? And so what you see here, I wasn't the only person, by the way, the only winery this happened to, but me and another winery got the answers. We got to figure out something, because not all the wine was bad, but there was no way to tell until you opened it. So how do you sell it? So some of the wines, we literally pulled the corks, dumped it back in the tank, let it ferment down, bought new bottles, new labels, new closures, rebottled again. Didn't make any money, but we had wine to sell, and that's what we had to do. We actually pulled back a wine club shipment and we refunded a bottle of wine to every wine club member, even though 30% of them, only 30% of wines were bad. We didn't know which 30%, so we just said, you know what? Here's this problem. We were very transparent. Karen and I call it the letter. We sent a letter to our wine club members, and it started with, we are very sorry to have to tell you that. And most people wrote back saying, thank God, we thought you were closing. But what we did is we found this device that's on your screen here, and it shoots a laser through the neck of the bottle, below the cork, above the wine, into that airspace, and it tells you what the partial pressure of CO2 is. This was a $20,000 piece of equipment. But we were able to, one at a time, hand by hand, put it in there, push a button, and go good, bad, good, bad. And we could segregate the wine, and we were able to recover some of that wine that was bad because we just didn't know. But at that point, when I realized that for the money that we lost due to the bad wine, we could have bought our own bottling wine. So the decision was made, we got to do something different. And so, yeah, I thought I skipped two, like one. So we said, well, we're running out of warehouse space anyway, so let's build a warehouse and buy a bottle of wine. And so that's what we did. And we decided that we're going to store our own wine, open up some processing room spaces. We're using half our processing room as a warehouse. And so we were able to get more tanks, make more wine. We currently make somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 cases of wine per year. And then we bought the bottling line, but it came down to, okay, what are we going to do for a closure, right? So here's an interesting statistic. Australia and New Zealand are moved most exclusively to screw caps. I work for an international company. I had a group dinner. We brought our head business development manager from Perth, Australia over. We went to Papa's Steakhouse in Houston, and we had a dinner in the wine room. And this guy walked around, and he came to me with this aghast look on his face, like, all these wines have corks in them. It was odd to him. I'm from Australia. We all have screw caps. So you can see, I think this is New Zealand, 90% of the wines are closed in a screw cap. And there's a reason why it was an easy transition for New Zealand first, and we'll talk about that. So these are 3 wines that were in our personal wine fridge, and I intentionally blocked out the names of the wineries on them. They are all 2016 vintage. They are all white wines. They were all bought at the same time. They all sat in the same wine fridge.
Wow.
And we pulled them out, and 2 of those have corks, and 1 has a screw cap. Can you see the difference in the color?
Uh-huh.
The ones with corks oxidized in a couple of years. Because this allows oxygen transfer. And you always hear people say, I hear a lot of winemakers say, man, I gotta sell all my white wine in 2 years. And I go, no, I don't. Our white wines have always been closed in a screw cap. Always. Because it is the only device that has 0 transmission of oxygen. None. None. And you definitely want that in your whites and rosés. It's going to give it longevity. You want oxygen. Oxygen in the wine industry is a frenemy. When you want it, you want it. When you don't want it, you don't want it. Right? And in white wines, you don't want it until you pour it in the glass. That's when you want it to pick up the oxygen and start to open up and release the aromas and the flavors. And so this was to me a very telling, not intentional experiment. It just happened that way, but it shows you that, you know, for whites and rosés, without a doubt, a screw cap closure with a tin liner is the best closure. And you're starting to see more and more white wines show up in screw caps, even if you go to the store, no matter where you're from. But the big dilemma is, yeah, but what about red wines? I want to age. I need that oxygen transmission. And this is where $10 million pays dividends that the Australians spent. So what this graphic shows is you get O2 transmission through a cork, through a plastic stopper. But if you look at this one, and you probably may not be able to see it there, but it has 2 things on there that it says about a screw tab. It says, if you have a Sarin or tin liner, 0 oxygen transmission. If you have a Sarin X, you get oxygen transmission. Sarin is a fancy word for saran. Saran wrap. Why do you wrap food in saran wrap? It inhibits oxygen transmission, which prevents decay, right? And so those tin liners, they call it a tin. If you say, I want a tin, 0 oxygen transmission, whites, rosés, and that's what we do. If you go with Sarin X or Optimax, I think they now call it, you get some oxygen transmission just like you would through the cork. But the good news is, I don't have to lay it on the side. I can store it upside down, right side up, left side, it doesn't matter. It's still happening, right? So I don't have anything to keep moist. It is the only closure that gives you that optionality. That as a winemaker, you can say, do I want oxygen on this or not? If I do, I pick that one. If I don't, I pick another one. And that's why we said, we're going screw cap. We've seen it happen in Australia, and now we're going to make it happen in Texas. Now, Texas is a pretty conservative group of people. And so there's a fear of, and I actually had a wine club member say to me, you go to screw cap, I want a $5 discount on every bottle. And I said, no, I'm giving you a better closure, I'm not giving you a discount. He has since come around. But if you look there's 2 screw caps, and I have one of each style in front of you. So one is a typical Stelvin, and it's the one that has the ridges on the OD, and kind of down the knurling and the groove at the top. And it doesn't have the Twin Lochs logo on it, right? And that's what you typically see. And the way this closure works is, as the bottle is passing through, it drops the closure on top of the bottle, and then a spring comes down and it pushes on the top hard enough to make the seal, and then a crimper goes around and it crimps the aluminum here to make the threads. So it's not threaded on the inside. Put your fingers in there, it's not threaded.
Yeah.
The downside of that is, it's got knurling and threads on the outside, like the one on the left. It doesn't look as attractive, and it definitely doesn't look like a bottle of wine with a cork in it. It's just this like smooth OD. The other one we have is called the Stelvin Lochs. Big fancy name Lochs for luxurious, that's their. This one has a thread on the inside. And so it's actually screwed onto the bottle like you would screw it on in a normal mode. But what it gives you is, as the picture shows, a bottle that looks very much like a bottle of wine with a cork in it. And so it looks like there's cork there. So the immediate reaction is not one of, oh, that's a lower quality wine because I can see those ridges from the threading of the screw cap. And so this is what we decided to run. The downside to that is the cap is not so much more expensive. The tooling to put the cap on is $75,000
Wow.
on top of your bottle line.
Huh.
But we're in a mode of we're trying to change people's perception about wine and wine closures. And the wine you're drinking today is closed with this Stelvin Lochs cap, 2017 Syrah, right? And so we made that investment to do that. So, I'm gonna just show you a quick video. Hopefully you can see it, maybe not. This is the bottling line. And the first thing that happens is the bottle slides under, the cap drops on, and then you can see the screw head screwing the cap on. Right? Now one of the things that is happening there, right as the bottle is sliding under to grab that screw cap, there's a little nozzle there, and it's injecting argon gas. Inert gas. Because the cork takes up space in the bottle that's not oxygen. Argon is heavier than air, so we fill that void with argon, drops on the cap, and closes it off, so you eliminate the oxygen in there. So that's how that works. And then I just have one more that is the action capping head working in slow motion. So before I play it, I'm just going to tell you what to look at. So if you look at this cap, on the bottom you'll see a gold band and it says Torr wines, Torr wines. Watch that part of the video. You'll see the capping head come down, it grips this, and you'll see those words turn and then stop and maybe turn just a little bit as it's tightening it up and then making it tighter. And then it comes in and it crimps the part underneath so that when you unscrew it, the collar stays and this part unscrews. It'll go in slow motion here. So watch the next one. And if you watch the piece in the center that's not turning, you can see it's spinning now. The bottle will move underneath. And then just watch the bottom of the cap as it comes down. The capping head grabs it, rotates it around, and then you can see the capping head stalls out and stops, crimps it, and off it comes. We've actually found that we can bottle much faster with much less challenges, less downtime with a screw cap. Because when you're doing corks and foils, because our bottling line will do that, then you have to worry about the corker working and nothing malfunctioning there, and then you have to put the foil on, and then you have to crimp the foil, right? So there's three things that have to happen. This happens all in one little go very quickly, and it's actually been a blessing for us. This is our second year of bottling with this bottling line.
I have a quick question. So if a winery wants to change over from corks to this type, what's the price difference?
In just the cork and the screw cap, it's about the same, right? Karen, she's the buyer, so.
It's only a couple cents difference.
Couple of cents
It's
a
the
bottle.
equipment though, right?
Everybody says this is cheaper. It's not. It's about the same amount of money. When you look at the cork and the foil versus
But
this,
to buy the bottle, the machine.
the machine is substantially different,
Yeah.
right? But to go to this standard Stelvin cap, it's not that expensive. You know, when you buy, our bottling line came with a closure device that will close this automatically, right? But we had to pay extra to close, to get a device to close this. We're one of two wineries in the state of Texas that can do
rent it out?
Don't. I rent it, we don't rent it out for the exact reason we don't like a bottling truck. I don't know the cleanliness of anybody's wine that comes in my facility. And we're fastidious about cleanliness. You know, they say 1 gallon of wine takes 7 gallons of water. That's true, but you're not using it in the wine. It's the cleaning and the cleaning and the cleaning and the cleaning. We finish with a piece of equipment, we clean it. Before we start, we clean it. We clean it and we're done. I bet we use, on a bottling run, we'll go through 1,200, 1,500 gallons of water just in cleaning before and after, right? And so I'm very worried to bring somebody else's wine in that may have yeast or bacteria, get Acetobacter or something in there that we just don't want. And now we're fighting another problem, and so we just bottle for ourselves. Economically, it's a terrible decision. But it is what it is. So this is what our wines look like finished, right? So you can see the cap heads there, and you can see the caps. You know, the first year we didn't get the customized caps like you see here, but for 2018, all of our wines had these caps that have the Torr Lochs logo on top and the band on the bottom, so it's more customized. And the last thing, I think this is the last slide, and I'll let you go. I've only found one negative impact of a screw cap, so I thought I'd share that with you. In completeness, I think it's really important. It's this. There's only 2 kinds of people in this world: those who have put a corkscrew through a screw cap, and those who are going to. That's all that's left, right? And so, and particularly with this cap, because it looks so much like it has foil. We've had wine cleaners say, "Man, I spent like 30 minutes, like I can't cut the foil, I can't get the thing." And then I realized, oh, so that's it. Thanks for having me, and I'm happy to answer your questions if we have time. If you guys say he's talked too long, get out of here, I'll do that too.
That was awesome. Are there any, stay here just a second, are there any questions? No questions? Oh, another question?
It was long, but you entertained us very nicely and introduced something that before you told me is kind of boring, but I thought it was fascinating.
It really is. Thank you both. This has just been very interesting. We've got a little information.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much.